The man raised his hand to gain the attention of those assembled and asked quietly if they would all please take their seats so that they could begin. The murmuring of the congregation died down. Then it was utter silence, except for one noise. Scratching. Alan peered at the coffin once more. The scratching stopped. He continued to gaze at the long, ornate box, expecting the noise to start again. It didn't. He looked around to see if anyone else had noticed this. No one was watching the casket. He suspected that he had imagined it and shook away the thoughts. Pastor Rick welcomed everyone, thanked them for coming to the memorial service for Charlene Criss, and opened his Bible to Psalm 23. The man's words droned out for Alan as his eyes drifted back to the coffin. He stared at it for a long time. Then he heard the scratching noise again, louder, more insistent. This time he was sure it had come from the casket. His heart began to race. He threw a casual look to his side at his mother, but she was not distracted by the noise coming from the casket. He turned and sought the faces of his friends in the crowd. He found each of them in turn, and none of them seemed to notice anything amiss either. He turned back to the front and was startled when the coffin bounced on the wheeled display cart. Alan jumped a little in his seat, and a tiny yelp escaped him. His mother reached over and patted his arm gently, then withdrew her hand once again. Alan leaned forward in his seat and now devoted his entire attention to the coffin. It bounced again. His heart raced faster. He looked to his mother, and she was still raptly gazing at Pastor Rick. So was everyone else in the room. He couldn't understand why no one else noticed the strange thing happening right in front of them. It didn't make any sense. The coffin jumped on its cart once more. More scratching. Then it bounced again, leaping almost a foot into the air. The scratching sounds coming from the coffin were now maddening, and Alan covered his ears. Then the coffin jumped so hard that it fell off the cart, tumbling to the floor. It came down with a loud crash. A scream escaped Alan, and he threw himself against the seat. Everyone else in the room remained sitting quietly and obediently. It was impossible, but they didn't notice what was going on. Alan slowly stood. He expected his mother to try to restrain him again, but she left him alone entirely. Alan slid down the row, quietly excusing himself to those he brushed past. They didn't pay him any mind. He came to the aisle leading up to the downed casket and the platform beyond. He stopped in the middle of it and raised his eyes to Pastor Rick. Pastor Rick was now delivering a eulogy for Charlene Criss. His words came so soft and slow. He whispered everything he said. There was no way anyone in the funeral home would hear what he was saying. Alan could barely make it out. His eyes dropped to the coffin once again. There were more scratching noises, and they were quite loud. 3 long, drawn-out scratches resounded through the auditorium. The noise seemed to come from everywhere at once. It was like whenever he sat in the movie theater and the speakers mounted throughout the theater conveyed the sounds of the film. Alan took a tentative step forward, then another. He halted and watched the coffin cautiously. More scratching noises came forth. Alan crept toward the coffin. Soon he reached it and knelt by the casket. It laid on its side. Suddenly it fell over onto its back and he jerked away. His foot caught on the leg of a chair behind him and he fell. Instead of standing and running, he rapidly crab-walked backward, certain something was about to come out of the coffin and pursue him. But the coffin lay still. Hot and heavy breaths came and went, came and went. He felt as if he had just run a marathon. Another long, scratching noise, louder and longer than any of the previous ones, filled the space. Alan was rooted in place and permeated by cold dread as he watched the casket with anticipation. Several long seconds passed and nothing happened. Alan got to his knees and crawled cautiously toward the casket. He reached it again and stretched a hand out toward it. Before his fingers arrived at the smooth, varnished surface of the casket, the lid sprang open. Alan jerked back, expecting something to reach out and snatch him by the wrist. But he saw only the empty pink velvet lining of the casket's interior. No one was in it. But Alan could see that the inside of the lid was scratched heavily, as if some ferocious beast had been inside and had tried to claw its way out. The velvet lining and stuffing had been shredded. Ribbons of the torn fabric hung down and the ends dripped blood. The bare wood beyond was gouged by a series of countless deep scratches. That is when Alan awoke from the nightmare.